He married her for land he'd never save alone. Yet dawn's first light showed why every deal has hidden teeth. Dust swam in the slanted sunbeams of St. Jude's Chapel, each mote a tiny ember drifting through silence. The small-town judge drummed restless fingers on the pulpit. Two witnesses, one deputy, one bemused organist, shifted weight against pine pews that smelled of varnish and winter damp. At the rail stood Ephraim Leverett, 28, shoulders hollowed by drought, hat dangling at sweat-slick fingers. He wore the only suit he owned, its elbows thinned by funerals rather than festivals. Next to him loomed Marjorie Hale, recent widow of a freight hauler, her figure broad as a haystack, cheeks round and pale, hands clasped beneath a modest bouquet of roadside asters. The bodice of her cream dress stretched hard across generous ribs, lace strained like fence wire in storm wind. No organ played. No friends filled the benches, only law and necessity. Ephraim's ranch was down to one skeletal herd and 6 unpaid notes. Marjorie possessed 40 acres of bottomland and the title to a functioning well. The bank president, Mr. Pelter, had arranged the match, promising loan forgiveness if Ephraim married the widow and merged deeds, one parcel fit to sell off, another taxed into salvation. All parties except the groom had spoken. Pelter watched from the wings, ledger tucked tight to ribs like an oath. "Do you?" the judge began, but Ephraim heard nothing beyond his own heartbeat. He stared at Marjorie's face, calm, unreadable, eyes cast just below the cross nailed on rough board. She did not glance at him, did not tremble. Her hair, parted straight, fell in a single dark river braided down her back. He thought of the well on her land, cold water lifting from deep earth, wondered if her silence came from the same dark place. The vows read quick, dry as ledger lines. Ephraim mumbled, "I do," voice cracking like old hinges. Marjorie's answer rang soft but solid, "I will." A cheap brass ring, Pelter's purchase, found its place on her thick third finger. By the time the judge's gavel tapped, Ephraim felt the echo roll down pews and into his stomach like the first unsuspected jolt of fever. Outside, sunset stretched across the valley, painting the bank's tall windows in blood-orange stripes. Pelter shook Ephraim's hand, leaving ink scent on skin. "Land merges at dawn," he chirped. "You sign the release after sunrise, the county will witness." He tipped hat to Marjorie but did not wait for a nod. Dust from his wagon wheels swirled, then settled. The newlyweds rode back in silence on Ephraim's wagon, empty but for a saddle blanket and a cracked canteen. Night rose fast. Coyotes rehearsed their song beyond creekbed shadows. Marjorie's weight set the leaf springs groaning, each sway a reminder of bargain struck. Ephraim stole a glance. The moon's blue edge etched her cheek, softening its roundness into something almost regal. Still she spoke nothing. They reached the ranch house. 2 rooms, 1 leaning porch, roof patched with tar paper prayers. Ephraim helped her down. Her boots sank half an inch into hardpan. Inside, the air smelled of cold ash and forgotten meals. He gestured toward the only bed, rough cedar, 1 quilt thin as rumor. She shook her head and moved toward the straw tick near hearth. Before he could protest, she unrolled a blanket from her small travel satchel. No trunk, no vanity, only this single bundle. Kneeling, she lit the lamp herself, fingers sure, then began loosening the ribbon of her braid. Ephraim stood, hat still in hand, words trapped behind teeth unused to comfort. Marjorie looked up, eyes calm pools. "You keep the bed," she said, voice even. "We will start on fences at first light." Only then did he realize she had been studying his place the whole wagon ride. Each sagging rail, each starved calf, every sigh he tried to hide. She blew the lamp low. Wick hissed, darkness settled thick. Sleep refused him. He stared at rafters, counting knots. Beyond cracked window panes, a sliver of moon slid down the ridge. Hours later, faint rustle drifted from Hearthside. Marjorie's shape rose, crossed floorboards with surprising lightness. She stepped outside. Door creaked but did not close. Ephraim followed, boots soft on packed dirt. In the yard, moon had gone. Only a faint pearl line of dawn touched the horizon. Marjorie stood by his old windmill, dead fins hanging idle. Barefoot, her white dress gray and pre-light, hair unbraided, falling over shoulders like midnight water. Around her neck glinted a small brass key on ribbon. She reached into bodice, drew it out, then knelt at the windmill's seized gear casing. The key fit a hidden panel. She twisted. A dull clank sounded. Inside the hollow mass, she retrieved a tin canister, no bigger than a sugar jar. She opened the lid. A folded sheaf of bank bonds emerged, edges crisp, wax seal intact. Ephraim's breath stalled. Marjorie spoke almost to the sky, words floating. My husband hauled payroll for Pelter twice a year. He skimmed what he thought no one would miss. She turned, eyes steady. I traded silence for land and freedom. She held the bonds out. Water buys only time. We need seed and stock. First sunlight hit her face, neither timid nor cruel, but illuminated with practical mercy. Ephraim's legs seemed rooted. He took the bonds, felt wealth heavier than devotion. Why trust me? He rasped, voice gravel. Marjorie's reply was simple. Because you kept the bed for me. She walked back toward the porch, leaving faint footprints in dawn's soft dust. In that instant, Ephraim understood how thunder sometimes hides in clouds no larger than a prayer. The county would indeed be shocked by sunrise, just not for the reasons Pelter or the judge expected. And in the hush before roosters cried, the mute valley heard the quiet click of two fates unfastening themselves from debt and locking instead into daring. A pale line bled across the eastern ridge as Ephraim Leverett unfolded the stolen bonds on the kitchen table. Numbers marched in neat columns, amounts he had never dreamed, more than enough to drown every note Pelter held against him. Marjorie stood by the stove, coaxing flame from kindling. Her eyes, a shade between moss and sorrow, followed the shiver of the paper, not his face. Your husband kept this hid in my windmill? Ephraim asked, voice hoarse from a decade of rationed speech. He liked hollow things, she answered, spooning coffee grounds into a tin pot. Barrels, promises, men who call themselves bankers. Outside, the first rooster split quiet. Ephraim turned the bonds toward lamplight. Pelter's wax seal glowed like a brand on a calf. Possession alone would not free them. Endorsement lines ran blank. He tapped a blank signature rectangle. Need a hand that matches his, he muttered. Marjorie poured 2 tin cups, steam curling. He was a freight thief, not a careful one. From a pocket of her satchel, she drew a strip of rice paper bearing her late husband's scrawl. The man had practiced forging Pelter's name until muscle memory carved it into wrist. Trace this, and the bank will swear Pelter signed every dollar. Ephraim stared. Crime layered on crime, yet the land, the animals, the people cheated by Pelter's usury flashed through his mind. He slipped the sample into the bond sheath, decision lighting behind his eyes. They hitched the wagon at sunrise. Marjorie seated herself beside sacks of feed, purchased on credit she intended to erase before nightfall. Ephraim flicked reins. Wheels cut frost crust. The town still yawned as they clattered down the main street. Pelter's office lamp already burned. Ambition never slept. Inside, the banker looked up, pen frozen mid-ledger at sight of bonds. Liquidation? He asked, glee slicking his tone. Ephraim laid the stack on the desk. Signature lines filled, wax seal unbroken, Pelter's forged mark flawless. The banker scanned, mouth tightening. Where? Your private reserve, Marjorie said, settling her bulk into a visitor chair, calm as Sunday. Transferred in settlement of our merged property. Pelter's forehead glazed. He riffled pages, hunting flaw, found none. His own signature trapped him. This is theft, he breathed. Then summon the sheriff, Ephraim replied. His voice carried steel he'd never used. Explain how these were hidden inside my windmill. His badge will like that riddle. Silence clamped the room. Pelter weighed choices as though each breath cost him interest. Finally, he opened a drawer, removed 3 foreclosure notes, Ephraim's, Marjorie's, and a dozen neighbors. Torch flame couldn't have erased them faster than his shaking hand across the cancel stamp. Paid in full, he croaked. The rest of this will disappear. Ephraim gathered the notes. Marjorie rose, skirts whispering like triumph subdued. At the door, she paused. Raise interest on another widow, and we'll find the rest of your hiding barrels. Pelter's pen snapped. Snowmelt glazed the wagon ruts homeward. At the feed store, they exchanged 1 bond for 20 head of Hereford yearlings and enough seed to green every acre. Neighbors gaped as the wagon rolled by. Marjorie perched atop burlap, eyes forward, iron calm. Ephraim's posture taller than harvest stalks. They turned into the ranch lane just as noon's thaw dripped from eaves. Ephraim led the yearlings into the east corral, his hands steady on each trembling hide. Marjorie walked the fence line, hammering loose nails, her dress brushing rails, voice humming a tune shaped like open windows. That evening they shared stew thick with hope. Ephraim broke bread, half smile tugging. "Will you take the bed tonight?" She glanced at the cradle frame propped near hearth, cedar rails awaiting finish. "Soon," she answered, and handed him the whetstone. "Tomorrow we mend the plow. Spring cannot wait." Night settled, chimney drawing sparks into velvet sky. From the porch, Ephraim watched clouds herd westward, feeling ribs expand beyond old debts. Behind him, Marjorie traced crib slats with calloused fingers, humming low, a melody carried from wells deeper than money or shame. The house, once hollow as Pelter's promises, filled with sound. Hammer taps, calf balls, two hungers learning the same rhythm. Somewhere between those heartbeats, he realized dawn had indeed rewritten the valley ledger, but ink alone hadn't done it. It was the steady hand of a woman no one expected, and the voice of a man who had finally chosen to speak. Late March crept warm enough to wake the pond's frogs. Their metallic croaks echoed off the windmill tower now turning again. Ephraim had greased the gearbox, and the blades clacked a fresh rhythm, lifting pale blue water into the trough. Marjorie, sleeves rolled past the elbow, scattered wheat seed from a burlap sling. Her wide shadow moved with purpose, fringe of winter grass bowing under each step. The new Hereford yearlings nosed green shoots along the east pasture, tails flicking the last flies of chill season. In the barn, sacks of oats and rye stood in neat rows. Each bore a chalk mark, Marjorie's quick code for germ test, milling, or seed stock. Ephraim was still learning to read the system she carried in her head, but he marveled at how certainty followed wherever she walked. They built a second pen for pigs, trading 2 jars of honey for a sow-do farrow. The midwife, no longer needed for crisis, brought her husband to raise fencing posts. He noted the orchard buds and asked if Ephraim would sell graft cuttings come fall. "Talk when roots know they're safe," Ephraim answered, voice steady without effort now. One dusk, a dust tail galloped up the lane. Deputy Crane, lathered horse, eyes wide. "Pelter's office burned," he panted. "Ledger room gone. Town marshal wants statements." Marjorie leaned on the porch rail, expression unreadable. "We were here," she said. Crane exhaled relief, not doubt. He'd seen fresh plow furrows all the way in. Embers in town could not leave scorch marks across 10 miles of turned earth. He rode off, the news trailing behind like smoke. Fire meant Pelter's claw marks were ash. Still, winter letters arrived, distant banks pressing for freight losses tied to Marjorie's late husband. One envelope held a hand-drawn map, the hollow mast of the windmill sketched in precise lines, a threat aimed at rediscovery of hidden crimes. Ephraim read it by lantern, jaw set. Marjorie tore the page into thin strips, dropped them into the stove. Flames swallowed the past sentence by sentence. In April, the Valley Creek swelled. Water slithered under split-rail fences, pooling at the low corner where Ephraim had thought nothing useful would grow. Marjorie stepped into black muck, toes sinking, listening. "Rice beans," she murmured. They bartered for seed and planted rows in standing water. Neighbors laughed. Beans in a swamp. Yet weeks later, tender vines climbed the willow stakes, leaves bright as minted coin. The day before May, Judge Hawthorne trudged up with a saddlebag of papers. "Title's cleared," he said, handing 2 deeds. 50 acres in Ephraim's name, 40 in Marjorie's. Boundaries merged by mutual grant. He slid a smaller envelope across the table. Damages awarded from Pelter's estate, enough to build a granary. Hawthorne removed his hat, gaze curious. "What do you call the place now?" Ephraim looked to Marjorie. She spoke one word: fork root. The judge nodded as if the land itself had chosen. By midsummer, golden wheat shimmered hip-high. Ephraim guided the reworked plow, while Marjorie steered solace with a soft click of tongue. Heat rolled, but wind off the pond cooled sweat, carrying scent of clover blown down from distant hills. When they paused, Ephraim wiped his brow. watching her squared shoulders against a turquoise sky. Gratitude ached in him, too full for speech. One evening, thunderheads muscled up from the west, blue-black anvils trimmed in fire. They gathered tools, latched shutters. Just after dusk, hail hammered roof plank, knocking loose shingles like dice on a tavern table. Marjorie shouted through the roar, "Orchard!" They raced outside, lightning stitching purple veins overhead. Ephraim draped feed sacks over the peach saplings. Marjorie stood in the open, back straight, arms wide, letting hailstones strike her sleeves to spare fragile buds beneath. When wind shifted, hail dwindled. Rain followed, heavy, vertical, drenching the earth deep. In morning sun, hail lay melted, leaving orchard intact. Saplings glittered, each leaf bearing a glass bead of water. Marjorie's arms bruised dark where ice had met flesh. Ephraim dabbed salve gently, palms shaking more than hers. She touched his wrist. "Bruises feed bark," she whispered. He bent, pressed a kiss to her bandaged forearm, a simple vow made without altar or gavel. Harvest month arrived. Wheat heads bowed heavy. Rice beans formed pods fat with promise. They borrowed a reaper from the judge, paid in advance with honeycomb slabs. On cutting day, dust plumed behind blades, and the valley glowed amber. Marjorie drove the team. Ephraim stacked sheaves with a rhythm he had once used for laments, but now spent on gathering plenty. At dusk, they counted rows of bound straw, enough to pay hands, seed next year, and trade for lumber to finish the crib where cedar slats waited. They loaded first grain sacks onto a wagon bound for the railroad spur, the same spur that had threatened the orchard. As steel wheels clanged in the distance, Ephraim realized tracks could serve curves after all, if a person learned to bend them. On the last night before frost, they sat side by side on the dam wall. Fireflies blinked across calm water. "We turned hollows into wells," Ephraim said, voice soft. Marjorie opened her palm. In it lay the small brass key, ribbon frayed. She handed it to him. "Hide it somewhere empty," she said. "Let that place stay hollow." He tossed the key into the deepest part of the pond. Midges rippled circles outward, widening until they kissed both their boots. Somewhere in the dark, a calf bawled. In the house, cedar slats creaked, waiting. Marjorie slid her hand into his. No document recorded the grip, but the land felt it, and the windmill turned slow, reliable, translating wind into water, water into roots, roots into a harvest no banker's ledger could tally. January left Powder Ridge locked in steel blue frost, yet inside Forkroot, every corner pulsed warm. New grain in bins, smoke curling from a chimney Marjorie herself had bricked. Dawn found her kneading rye while Elias sliced bacon. No chatter, only a soft duet of work. Outside, the rice bean patch rattled with dry pods, the pond breathed under thin ice, and the windmill, greased and turning again, lifted pale water into troughs. Two stray Hereford calves bawled to be let into the warm barn. Elias opened the gate, wondering when silence had become so full of answers. Fire that doesn't burn. Deputy Crane galloped in, coat white with hoarfrost. Pelter's office had burned overnight, ledger room gone. Elias and Marjorie had spent the dark hours spreading straw for the pigs. Crane had seen the lamplight in their barn windows, alibi as solid as new timber. Pelter's last claw marks turned to ash. Still, winter mail delivered threats from a distant partner. Marjorie tore one letter into stove kindling, sending it the same way. Water turned to promise. Spring melt flooded a useless corner. Marjorie waded shin-deep muck and declared, "Rice beans." Neighbors laughed until vines leafed bright jade and pods fattened. The judge riding past tipped his hat. Miracle soil or miracle wife? Elias only smiled. Deeds set in new names. Judge Hawthorne returned with merged titles, 50 acres to Elias, 40 to Marjorie, and damages from Pelter's estate. "What do you call the place now?" he asked. Marjorie spoke, "Forkroot." The judge swore the land itself nodded. Hail on broad shoulders, may thunderheads birth a hailstorm. Marjorie threw feed sacks over peach saplings and used her body to shield the smallest row. Ice bruised her arms dark as plums, but every bud lived. Elias dabbed salve, lips trembling on bandages. She whispered, "Bruises feed bark." He believed it. Wheat in the curved water. Summer wheat shimmered hip-high. Marjorie drove the reaper. Elias tied sheaves. The curved channel, dug that winter to repel the railroad, kept every root drinking. A depot rose miles south, far from Fork Root's wetland curve. Steel served them now, not harmed. Crib, waiting for new life. With damages money, they raised a cedar crib beside the hearth. Nights, Marjorie stitched linens while Elias carved wave shapes along the rail. Echo of pond circles. In early snow, she felt first kicks. They spoke no fear, only future. Storm and birth, a blizzard howled. Midwife stoked kettles. Marjorie sang Lakota rhythm under labor's roar. Dawn offered a son, full-voiced, named Takyawiaka, echo of dawn, after Elias's brother. Snow muffled the world, but inside cedar walls hummed warm resin. Key to the hollow spring thaw turned pond ice to mirror. Marjorie handed Elias the brass key once hidden in her bodice, symbol of all hollow deals. "Throw it where it stays hollow," she said. He cast it into pond depth. Ripples widened, reached both their boots. Hollows could remain hollows. Other places were full. When May's sun kissed orchard petals, windmill blades spun slow, sure arcs. Wheat rustled, calves butted green fence, and every root drank. Fork Root no longer whispered survival. It spoke abundance. Language Elias and Marjorie both understood. Late summer burned hot enough to buckle wagon rims, but Fork Root thrived beneath a quilt of green. Wheat shocks towered like small chapels. Rice bean vines curled high on willow poles. And the peaches, first heavy year since hail, blushed the color of dawnstone beads. Elias spent mornings clearing a new paddock. Marjorie, one arm carrying baby wheat, directed crews who dug a sister channel so water could loop back into the pond. "A circle feeds itself," she reminded every hired hand. "A straight line returns." In August, a stranger rode in on a bay gelding, coat too fine for dust. Ambrose Flint, Pelter's Eastern partner. He carried a leather folio and a railroad attorney's grin. At the porch, he read from stamped parchment. Claims on Pelter's burnt ledgers, liens still active, interest compounding. Elias felt old frost clutch his spine, but replied calm. "Ledgers ash, our deeds stand." Flint's gaze slid over Marjorie, noting the baby, the bruises that had become faint shadows. "Paper burns," he said, tapping folio. "Signatures don't." He would return in 3 days with county deputies. That night, Elias paced the yard, voice tight. "Straight men always come back." Marjorie stood by the pond, rock skipping. "Then we bend them," she said, watching ripples wobble on the far bank. Bending the law. Next dawn, Marjorie harnessed Solace and drove to town, baby swaddled beside the seat. She visited every grower Pelter had bled, Mrs. Dunlay with her apple orchard, the Hewitt brothers who lost sheep, Deputy Crane whose cousin's store closed over loan interest. By noon they met in the church hall, each holding scorched fragments of old loan papers. They'd rescued corners during the fire to prove debts gone. Judge Hawthorne, robed dusty from Harvest Court, agreed to host a public inquiry the very hour Flint planned to seize Fork Root. The gathering Flint arrived on schedule, deputies flanking him, writs fluttering crisp. He dismounted before the orchard gate to find half the county gathered under peach shade. Hawthorne banged gavel atop a cider barrel. "If there's a claim, present it here." Flint sneered but produced Pelter's carbon duplicates. Figures neat, signatures perfect. Marjorie stepped forward, arms bare in the heat, wheat on her hip. She held up Pelter's original fire-scarred pages. Lone lines charred unreadable, seal broken during the blaze. The crowd murmured. Flint's duplicates gleamed too white, too new. Mrs. Dunlay produced ledger scraps singed to lace. The Hewitts laid out melted brass lock hinges from Pelter's safe. Proof it burst from inside, not outsider arson. Deputy Crane testified he'd guarded the ranch during the night of the fire, Elias and Marjorie nowhere near town. Flint's argument bent like soft tin. Judge Hawthorne declared the liens fraudulent by fabrication. Deputies holstered pistols, and Flint's attorney grin cracked at the edges. Hawthorne offered him choice: face indictment or ride out. Flint chose dust. As he wheeled the bay, Marjorie spoke once. Straight lines break. He answered nothing. The road swallowed hoofbeats. Harvest turned to bread. September air cooled. Elias built a limestone oven behind the house. Marjorie mixed the first dough from fork root wheat, rice bean flour, and a spoon of wild honey. At sunrise, the loaf rose fragrant and golden. She tore the heel, pressed it into Elias's palm. Steam curled into dawn, sweet as orchard fragrance. He carried a piece to baby wheat, now sturdy enough to sit in straw, and let her taste the crumble. She gurgled, fist closing on crumbs like seed. That afternoon, neighbors gathered for the first fork root market day. Barrels of peaches, jars of bean relish, wheels of hard cheese from Dunlay milk lined makeshift tables. Marjorie stationed herself beside the new oven, slicing warm bread, handing slabs free to anyone who had once paid Pelter's interest. Some cried, some laughed like men dropped into clear water. When the sun slid low, Elias climbed the windmill ladder, fresh grease tin in hand. From the top platform, he saw curved water glitter through reeds, the second channel meeting the first in a smooth loop, a necklace clasping the ranch. Beyond, new wheat rows traced gentle arcs rather than straight drills, following the lay of ground. He realized fork root itself was now a circle, pond to field to pond again, bread to neighbor to bread. He descended, wiping hands on trousers, and found Marjorie rocking wheat beneath the peach limbs. Lantern light haloed mother and child. Bead bracelets chimed quietly against cedar cradle slats. Elias knelt, resting one hand on Marjorie's broad shoulder, the other on the cradle rail he'd carved months before. For the first time, he understood that land could hold stories deeper than wells. A mute vow turned voice, a stranger turned compass, a doe-round child binding past to tomorrow. Night settled, cool and cricket loud. The windmill blades creaked slow, faithful. Pond frogs began their metallic hymn. Inside, the stone oven glowed dull red, last loaf cooling on the hearth. Marjorie whispered something in Lakota, a blessing for roots that would sleep through frost and wake sure in spring. Elias didn't know the words, but their shape felt like bread in hungry hands, like water in drought, like silence finally folded into song.